As I was getting ready to make some pictures, why, I heard this noise. I thought it was a firecracker explosion. I just went ahead and made the picture, which shows the president right after he was struck by a bullet, struck in the neck, the first shot. And this was a picture that the Warren Report later fixed as being made 2 seconds after the shot was fired. And as they got in close to me, and I was prepared to make the picture, I had my camera almost at eye level. That's when the president was shot in the head.
A little bit. Is it all right now? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the newsroom of our radio and television station. As you can see, most of the boys are out. Bert, let's see. Let's get reorganized here. Grab that cable over there. We're on the air, Bert, and let's talk to you just a minute here. Is this all right? Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you the chief cameraman and assistant news director of WFA Television. This is Bert Shipp. Bert, we have brought the people pretty much up to date. Would you tell them exactly what you know as of this point?
Well, Jay, I was standing at the Trade Mart waiting his arrival there. All of a sudden, we saw them approaching. They didn't slow down. As a matter of fact, they were going 70 or 80 miles an hour past us. Everybody was unknowingly, didn't know what happened there at the Trade Mart. And then I jumped in a police car and went to Parkland. When I got there, I found that nobody knew too much about where he was hit, but they knew that the president was shot in the head. This is what I've been told now, Jay. The president was shot in the head. Connally was shot in the chest. Both of them are still alive when I left the hospisphospital.
Do you have some film?
And yeah, I have film at the hospital.
Will you get the film and see if you can get it developed real quick?
Yeah, I will.
We'll put it on the air
and
run through.
One quote we got out there was Yarborough said the scene was too gruesome to describe.
I know.
And I've spent most of my time, so I'm going to get the film ready now.
Good.
I was a second-year medical student at Southwestern Medical University in Dallas, Texas. We ran around the side of the building to the emergency room exit, and the presidential limousine was there. Had been standing there for some time just watching the back of the emergency room when I realized that there was a bullet hole in the windshield. Talked to my friend next to me and said, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield," and pointed it out to them. At the time, I did not know any of the details of the shooting. I was quite shocked when I looked up and saw the bullet hole, but it was very clear. It was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back. I don't believe there's even any cracks associated with that bullet hole. It seemed like a high-velocity bullet that had penetrated from front to back in that glass pane. At which point, a security officer of some type raced forward and jumped in the limousine and drove it off, even as I was leaning against it, to an area back of us somewhere. And that was the last time I saw the limousine.
Aubrey, what brought you to Parkland Hospital in the first place?
We picked up a patient on North Houston there, an epileptic, and took him to Parkland. We was waiting for the patient to be signed in at the time everything took place here.
What happened?
Well, first of all, these two men come running in. One of them had a large, what appeared to be a machine gun, and they was hollering for stretchers and cots and everything, and to me it appeared that there was some lunacy or something, and then immediately after that, the Vice President of the United States came in. He was very pale. Some Secret Service men was walking him in at the time.
And did the president come in?
Yes, sir.
And then what did they do with the president?
They took him on back to one of the trundle rooms in the emergency room there. Before the president come in, the governor, they brought him in first.
What happened after this?
Well, then the president come in and moved behind him, and after he come in, his wife was behind him, and they took them all the way, both of them, back to the trundle room at Parkland there.
Can you give us any of the intimate details?
You mean after they brought him in?
Yes.
Well, of course, they run everyone out of the emergency room of the hospital completely on the first floor there, and they told a rider and I to stand by at the rear of our ambulance in case the president or someone had to be removed from the hospital to another hospital. And we stood by there until later on they come out and told us that we would have to help remove the remains into a casket.
Dennis, what happened to the hearse?
We were standing by there. One of the Secret Service men come up and told us that we would have to help putting the president into the casket and getting him to the airport. And at that time, right after he had told us that, well, Mr. O'Neill came up in our 64 Cadillac hearse, and we unloaded and took the casket into where the president was. And before we put the president in his casket, well, the president's wife took her wedding band. It looked to be like her wedding band off of her finger and put it on the president's and kissed his hand. And then he left, and we took him out and put him into the hearse. And one of the Secret Service men, well, about 2 or 3 of them got into the hearse and just drove off.
We made valiant and unceasing efforts to resuscitate this man who was mortally wounded. And I think had we taken the opposite attack and said, oh, this man is dead, that even today people would be questioning and telling us stories about mortally wounded people who had been resuscitated when all hope was lost. So instead of taking that approach, we took the approach, let's save this man if we can, and we made what would be commendable, I think, even by today's standards, efforts to resuscitate him.
I observed in the lower third of the neck a small, rounded, well-demarcated entrance wound. This was obliterated by the tracheostomy in that Dr. Perry made the tracheostomy incision through the entrance wound. Different parts of the tissues were spread. He then made the incision into the trachea and through the hole that had previously been made by the entrance of the bullet.
The reports had been that the president had been shot from the rear, from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. And the evidence at hand from the Parkland Hospital doctors of a small, neat wound in the neck was contradictory to that, or at least complementary to that, in the sense that it required that there be a shot from in front, so that if he were shot from the rear, he was also being shot at the same time from in front. So I wanted to tell whoever was going to do the autopsy about that, and so I telephoned Bethesda Naval Hospital. The officer of the day I knew, and he put me quickly through to Dr. James Humes, who was going to head the autopsy team. He was very cordial, and we had a good conversation, brief. He had not heard about the neck wound. I told him that it was important because it was a wound of entrance, and I told him that it should be explored completely for its track and to find any bullet or fragments of bullets that would remain, and particularly emphasized that it had to be a frontal wound since there was no tearing of the tissues. He left the telephone momentarily and came back and said, "Dr. Livingston, I'm sorry I can't continue this conversation. The FBI won't let me."